Buddy Sola, community manager at Akupara Games, and this is episode 5 of the Akupara Games podcast, the Akupara Podcast, where I am joined by the illustrious producer at Akupara, Alyssa Kollgaard, to talk today about Brainframe. Brainframe is the third in our prototype Akupara Game Jam series. We've been releasing one a week every Thursday. They are all playable right now for free on Gamejolt and itch.io, and we just released today the third in that series, which is Brainframe. Alyssa, welcome to the show. How's life? How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm well, and I'm Alyssa.
Everybody, you can say hi to Alyssa because she is very active on Twitter. But we'll plug all that stuff at the very end of the podcast. Okay, so as most of you know, at the end of last year, we spent a little bit of time getting away from our normal publishing and development tasks, and instead we hosted a game jam where a bunch of different people in the company, we formed these teams and we worked on very quick, scrappy prototype games that we are now releasing to each and every one of you. The first one of those is my game Tavern Keeper. The second one was the subject of last week's podcast, was Playmates Panic by Joni, and this week we're going to talk about Brainframe, which we have called like a reverse roguelike. Right? Would you call that like a good genre definer for Brainframe?
Yeah, it's also got elements of like shoot 'em up platformer, so it was kind of based on Mega Man. Like, what if Mega Man was a roguelike where the reverse functionality comes in, the more you play, the harder the game actually gets, and it has stacking randomization instead of, making it easier the more you progress.
Right, because most games, it feels like, have a kind of like positive power fantasy. You are getting more powerful over time. You are becoming stronger and facing more difficult challenges, where it seems like Brainframe is almost the exact opposite, right? It is about kind of you are getting progressively weaker, and there's like a time limit, I guess, sort of associated with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just a prototype, so we didn't get the full scope of functionality that would really make that randomized roguelike experience kind of complete and comprehensive, but the short version of it is that you have this base gameplay. It's a platformer where you have enemies with AI, and you shoot them, and the more you go into the game, as you said, like a roguelike, you actually progress, and some of them you even maintain abilities through each playthrough so that you're leveling up your skills as a player in addition to actual skills that are granted through the game. But this, we wanted to see what would happen if the only thing that was consistent was the player's skill, and the game actually was what you were competing against rather than competing against enemies. You are actively working against the game itself.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So when it came to like the very first inklings of the idea for like Brainframe, is that where you had it before like the game jam even started? Like, where did that idea for the game come from?
Yeah, so Brainframe actually was an idea that happened before the game jam, where I had been playing a lot of cyberpunk, like MS-DOS games from the 90s on Twitch, and the games themselves just do not stand the test of modern design sensibilities, right? Like, the UI is really unintuitive. There's just all this stuff that's very nebulous and not broadcast to the player. The game itself is very challenging to get through, but there was something about it that was really kind of fun and engaging as like a historical element, right? Like, it still had this feeling of nostalgia, and the frustration of the game design itself was kind of something that was fun and compelling to me. So I also watched a lot of speedrunners and like world record holders on Twitch, and a lot of times they're actually glitching out the game or using bugs within the system in order to get the best time. And I was thinking, what if there was a game that actually designed these sort of glitches and these difficulties as part of the core gameplay experience, rather than them being used as kind of ways to get around the game itself, like it was actually designed into the gameplay. So I pitched an idea to our designer, Matt, who's an excellent designer. He does all sorts of stuff. So is there a way that you can present a game that is intentionally bad and intentionally works against the player in a way that would be fun and interesting and challenging to them, especially considering speedrunners? And he said, well, you could add roguelike elements, so randomized and it is player controlled. Like, that is an excellent idea. And then it ended up the Game Jam came into existence, and we pitched it as an idea that people found kind of compelling, and that's how Brainframe started.
Yeah, and then we, as soon as the Game Jam pitches went out, we started organizing into those teams. Who else was on your team for Brainframe?
Yeah, so I'm not the only masochist or sadist at Akupara, it seems. So we actually got quite a few votes for this was their top choice. We're like, yes, we want to be terrible to our players intentionally. So...
I mean, that's true, right? Like, I feel like for Playmates Panic and Tavern Keeper, people, like, earnestly and straightforwardly were like, oh, that sounds like a fun, good time, right? And then Brainframe, it's like, I want to troll the shit out of people.
That was basically how it happened. So we had Matt, our designer, who is also a 2D environment artist. This was his first time actually doing 2D art for Akupara, but that's his main gig. And then we had Kat, who is our composer and sound designer, did both the music and the sound design in the game. Kyle, who is our narrative designer, and he also worked on Tavern Keeper. Kat also worked on Playmates Panic. And Kyle also did some acting in the project, and then, which we'll get to later. And then we
we will get to it.
Then we had Joey, who is our UI artist as well as our character artist. So we had a pretty good mix of people. Actually, everyone got to encompass 2 different skill sets over the course and then me, who I did the production on the project. I also did some video editing and a little bit of sound work, and worked on the design, although that was mostly Matt when it came down to actually building out the core gameplay.
Okay, so what was it like when you and the team first started work on the project? Like day one of the Game Jam, what was running through everybody's head?
Oh, and Addison, I'm so sorry. I was like, I know I'm missing somebody important. Addison was our engineer.
Rest in pepperonis, Addison. Addison, you're the best.
Like, someone is missing from the... Yeah, so the first day of the Game Jam, we kind of had a kickoff meeting where we presented a lot of different ideas about what is actually this core gameplay experience. Matt did a pass at what the base game would look like, because in order to do a roguelike, you need to have a game that you build on top of, essentially. Like, you are changing the rules of this core gameplay experience. So he decided to use Mega Man X as kind of the basis for that. And after that, we kind of all pitched ideas about these are different reverse roguelike functionalities, things that you could potentially pick up that would change the nature of the game. And after that, we jumped into a call together. We ran through the list of everything and what we wanted to do. We each kind of presented our own ideas, and then we did time estimates, said, okay, here are the things that we feel really strongly about and make the most sense for the actual core gameplay experience. And here are the different things as far as we ended up calling them disturbances that make sense in the time that we have and the scope. In addition to actually...
so the disturbances are sort of like what a roguelike mutation or power would be, right? Like if I was talking about Gone Viral, I'd be talking about mutations in items. In Brainframe, those are disturbances.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. When you so that's where you started. How did the project end up changing as time went on, right? So for Tavern Keeper, we had a pretty big we had our first prototype, but the big inflection point of our development was in the second week. We had a meeting on the Monday where we solidified a bunch of different ideas, and that's where high scoring and everything kind of came out of, which wasn't part of my initial pitch or design. Was there stuff like that was it was something that you had pitched as part of the internal kickoff meeting, and then got added in later, or better ideas that came up only once you started having builds coming out, that kind of stuff?
For the most part, what we pitched in the beginning is pretty close to what we actually ended up implementing. The biggest thing was that we kind of underestimated the amount of assets everyone would want to make and how much time they would take to implement. So the core game itself, right, is kind of the platforming and shooting and the disturbance system. But everyone was so excited about this project that they just dumped the biggest pile of assets ever on poor Addison. And he had to find time.
Poor Addison. Not only does he get left off of the, who's on your team question, but he also gets all of these assets, poured on him like a dump truck. That's amazing.
So everyone was just so excited about the idea for whatever reason, or just working on something for fun, that they just way over delivered on the amount of actual gameplay assets, and and we had to find time to actually get all of the core gameplay functionality in there also.
Okay, so when you're saying assets, I'm sure this is the juicy stuff. This is what everybody, I'm sure, is like tuned in for. Part of these is that you implemented a bunch of FMV videos, right? Full motion videos of like actual real world us, or not us, not me personally, right? But like members of the team who are acting in the diegesis of the game itself. Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so that was also kind of based on me going and playing all these 90s MS-DOS games, right? So I spent a lot of time trying to hunt down this weird, because it only existed for like 3 or 4 years in game history for some reason, and that was an idea that was very quickly abandoned, but it had a huge budget behind it for a short while. Like going back and playing these old games, there's people like Tia Carrera acting in them, and like all these people who have no business being in that kind of game. And they're really quirky and weird and funny, and it's something that just hasn't been touched in 20 years. And I got into video editing through quarantine out of boredom because I just am not able to work with my creative partners that I normally would. And we kind of were looking for a wrapper that made sense for the narrative of why you would be hitting disturbances in the game. And the hacking mechanic kind of came into an idea where, you know, it very cyberpunk inspired. Myself and Kat and Joey specifically are all very interested in kind of that genre of entertainment, and so the FMVs were just a matter of us having a way to do something that was really weird and different that we haven't seen in a while, that allowed us to kind of collaborate on these video assets and pull in other people on the team. So we also had Miguel, who acted, my partner, acted as Action Face, and then we have Kat's partner, who was also one of the actors in the death sequences. And they were fun. They're very weird. We're at varying levels of quality as far as acting skills go.
Was your goal to try and like make them like good or make them like kitschy, would you say? Like, are you trying to rehabilitate the lost art of the FMV video, or just, you know, FMV is just funny and that's why it's there?
No, it was definitely an intentionally campy project just across the board, where it's very inspired by that kind of early to mid 90s game just across the board as far as design and aesthetic and sound and stuff like that. But it was just something that I think we all thought was funny, and in addition to trolling the players, it was just kind of an additional weird element to add to the mix.
Do you have a favorite one of the FMV videos that, like, do you want to take this time to highlight, you, Alyssa, get to nominate one of the actors in your videos for the best performance at the Oscars? You get to award them this performance. Who wins that award?
Miguel for sure, I think, gave the best performance, but as far as the videos that were created, the first one, I kind of worked back and forth with Kat on the audio on this, where I would do a cut, send it to Kat, and they would do a pass to make it sound better, and then I would reintegrate it into the video. And there was one of Kyle playing Vincent Valenzi, which was the first one Kat recorded audio for me, where he kind of gives himself 2 thumbs up. And Kat said, I don't know if this is the right treatment. Is this too goofy? And they sent back an audio track where clown horns went over the video. Like, yep, this is 100% perfect. And then we just kind of continued down that path.
I'm always on board to congratulate Kat for being like immensely talented. Kat, who, by the way, was on the very first episode of the Akupara Podcast, and I constantly am talking to people and be like, this is like the best person on our team. They do such a good job at everything. And I feel like they definitely did with the FMV videos, right? Like, because those cuts in the audio and the way that it like glitches, it feels really like reminiscent of the way, you know, like bumping a Walkman used to make a CD skip or whatever. And it's like, I don't know how to explain that was perfect, other than to say it really perfectly encapsulated the, you know, like the degradation of some, I don't know, hard drive somewhere that is causing, you know, Vincent Valenzi to skip and to jump and to repeat phrases, you know, back over again. So I definitely would be very willing to give Kat plenty of credit, and also you plenty of credit for doing these great videos. Good job.
Yeah,
A+.
Thanks, man. It's cool having something that I made in a game with people who actually make stuff professionally for a living, because I just, in my day-to-day work, I'm just managing projects, but I don't really get to be involved in the creative or the design, so that was fun. The videos themselves, the Vincent Valenzi ones, are very Max Headroom inspired, right? Because it's kind of the same era. So a lot of that audio cutting is in the video itself, and then I would pass it to Kat, and Kat would sample out parts that really embellished kind of what we were trying to do as far as the glitchiness. It was fun. I like working with Kat.
Okay, so to talk a little bit about like the game itself, right? And when it came to that like platforming section and with the Mega Man gameplay, what did you think about that aspect of the game's sort of art and design? That was mostly headed up by Joey, I imagine, right?
So the art itself, I kind of put together a Pinterest board of like, here's a bunch of really weird games from the 90s that are cyberpunk in nature. So it was a lot of stuff like Burn Cycle. It was some of the FMVs like Ripper, kind of that whole weird, super niche genre. And then we didn't give Matt much direction as far as environment art. He just kind of went and did a thing, and that's actually one of the things that changed, where it started out where it was very urban, but it was meant to be kind of in the internet itself. So we gave him that comment, and then he went and he put in all of these binary and neon elements, and like, yes, perfect, looks awesome. And then the characters came from Joey, so and all the UI elements. And we made all of these elements kind of independently from each other, but from the same point of reference, and they all ended up being very similar in color palette, because we didn't get to iterate very much, right? Because it was a Game Jam game, so we kind of had to make our stuff and integrate it. So I was really impressed at how well they all looked together. It was disjointed yet cohesive simultaneously, which is interesting. So
yeah, that's like a classic Game Jam thing, right? Because in a real Game Jam, if we're like at a convention or something over a weekend, like an artist has to start working at the same time that like the programmer is like building the game itself. So you kind of have to assemble these puzzle pieces in unique silos and hope it all works out at the end. So that actually feels very like, I don't know, like I want to say traditional towards what a real Game Jam would look like, even though we made these games over the course of about 2 weeks, kind of like interspersed, right?
Yeah, we definitely gave each other progress shots and stuff like that, especially Joey sent a lot of things for us to give feedback on for the characters and things like that. And he did do more like concept phases where he had a few different options of what we could do for characters that we all kind of collectively voted on. But other than that, the stuff that we created was kind of the final product.
Okay, so, and then when it came to the game's core mechanics in that sort of like platforming section, how did you feel like the final product, right? Like, let's say I'm a listener at home. This is such an amazing, enthralling podcast. I can't wait to pick up Brain Frame, and I'm going to be playing the demo right now. What do you think about that demo and the way that the mechanics ended up for that player? Do you feel like it ended up in a good place, a bad place, an interesting place?
I definitely think that the game demo itself is representative of what we were trying to accomplish as far as the core gameplay, where the platforming and the shooting is not anything particularly complex, right? Because we had a limited amount of time, and that base gameplay needed to work with the roguelike elements. But you can jump, you can shoot, it all feels pretty good, it all looks pretty good. There are a handful of things that don't work exactly like we imagine it to. Like we intended to have room randomization in there, but it's just a specific layout, the same layout you play every time. And we made some assets for a final boss encounter that didn't end up making it in. We had a bunch of other disturbances we would have liked to have gotten in, but there's only a handful. But it's still very much, I think our references are very clear. I think what our intentions were very clear, and I think it's a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of opportunity for it to grow into a bigger project if there was ever an opportunity for it.
Okay, yeah, so if you were going to expand the game, what would you want to add?
Yeah, so for expanding the game, I think the main thing would be more disturbances. more enemies, more environments, having boss encounters at the end, kind of similar to most roguelikes where you're going through a single level and then you have a boss encounter and then you progress to the next level. I think that core loop would be where we would go with it, and also having randomized layouts and then just more enemies, better AI, and have some actual pickups and things in addition to the disturbances like health or ammo or different weapons. It follows a pretty traditional roguelike structure, the main difference being that it has FMVs and that the disturbances actually make you worse. But everything else like that would be pretty much what you'd expect out of a roguelike.
What you would want to add more FMVs, do you think?
I think we would want to add more FMVs. If this was a full game that was actually funded, we would probably... we worked with the people who were on the team, and like I said, we're all of various levels of acting abilities, so we would probably bring on actual actors and a real editor. We have much better editors who do trailers for our team.
Okay, so that's interesting. Let's say you had an unlimited budget, right? Like, whoever. I'm Elon Musk, and I play the Brainframe prototype, and I go, oh my God, this is so good. Here's $1 billion, right? Make it real. Who do you hire to play Vincent Valenzi? And who would you want directing those FMVs? Who would you want acting in those FMVs if you had that unlimited budget?
Yeah, I would probably want to bring in some of the people that were in the old FMVs. Like Ripper had Christopher Walken was one of the main characters in that, which I think is hilarious. And what the hell's the name of that guy? I can't remember his name, but I went and saw it, and I also had the actor from The 10th Kingdom, which nobody remembers that movie, but it was one of my favorite Hallmark made-for-TV movies. And the guy that played the main character, Wolf, was the detective, and it was very bizarre for me to go back and see because it was right at the same time period. I don't know, there's lots of opportunities for people who I think would like the gimmick, because it's very different than what actors are out there doing right now. Plus, we have a huge stable of voice actors that I think it would be fun to bring into an actual acting element of a game, because there's really not any opportunity to act on screen in games right now.
That is true, I guess. I mean, outside of, I guess like mo-capped Keanu Reeves in Cyberpunk 2077, right? But like, I do think about the days of, like the Command and Conquer series where there's that part where like Tim Curry and George Takei are like sending each other basically like TikToks about how much they hate each other, but they're supposed to be like world leaders. I mean, I feel like everybody has seen that one video where Tim Curry launches himself into space because he really hates capitalism or whatever.
I do that is for sure peak FMV, where he almost breaks and then they just went, yep, ship it, go with it.
Yeah, you don't need a second take on that one. It's just the one to go with, right? Okay, so how, at the end of the day, right, how different from the prototype is what you like ended up with Brainframe? Do you feel like it came a long way? Do you feel like it was, exactly what you had imagined when you were just like, yes, my creation, it lives, right? Like, how much change happened in that implementation process?
It's a little bit different than what we imagined. I was playing a lot of Scourgebringer at the time, which I don't know if you've played that game, but the room randomization is a big part of that, and definitely having the linear gameplay makes it feel more like a Mega Man game and less like the modern roguelikes. And we definitely, when we were doing our time estimates, we had projected a lot more opportunities for disturbances, but like I said, full disclosure, our team definitely put in more than 15 hours over the course of the 2 weeks because we were just having fun with it. Yeah. Which did mean we gave Addison a much bigger pile of shit to implement than what we had budgeted for. So less disturbances. But it looks great. The game has tons of assets. Like, it's got a very comprehensive UI and character art and animation system. And there's tons of audio assets in there and a full music track. And the full FMV scope. So there's definitely a ton of stuff in there, but it's not quite as much of the actual roguelike system as we would have liked. And it would have been fun to have a boss battle as well. But
that's actually really interesting because, like, I had a different experience and Jody also had a different experience. Like, last week, Jody on the podcast was talking about how the throttle for them was programming, right? It was hard for them to get developers to implement the maze in the way that they were looking for. But for Tavern Keeper, it was art. Like, that was our throttle. Is like I was asking for art for a bunch of different things, and it was just Drew, and Drew was like, I can't do this, right? Like, we have to go with some, and in that final game you can see, like, in the tavern the cloaked figures are all the same, they're just colored differently. Yep. That's because, like, Drew only did unique portraits for each character. He didn't do full bodies, right, for each character. So you would say that it was the programming that was sort of like the limiting factor, that was the bottleneck that your project had to get through. Was this just because you guys were putting in extra time?
Yeah, I don't know that programming was a bottleneck because Addison did a whole ton and accomplished a lot with the time that he had. But we had, like I said, we each kind of encompassed a couple different roles. So we only had the single programmer, and we were delivering video and UI and character art and character animation and VFX and sound effects and environment art and, like, different states for the environment art. I don't think the neon flashing made it into the final build, and it was just a lot of art implementation on top of actually building the game. So we definitely could have done with a second programmer. Some teams had 2 programmers, and we just had such a big pile of art.
Listen, you had such a big pile of enthusiasm. I get that for sure. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me and talking to me all about the ins and outs of designing Brainframe. I understand that you stream on Twitch, which you recommended earlier. Do you want to plug your Twitter, your Twitch real quick for all the viewers at home and all the listeners?
Not really, but I will.
I can cut this if you want.
On Twitter, I am Discord Dystopia because I was 1 letter short. And on Twitch, I am Discordia Dystopia. So I stream mainly cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic stuff. And when I'm not doing Akupara stuff, that's my focus, is dystopian content. Okay,
perfect. I'll have links down in the doobly-doo for anybody who wants to take the shortcut and give you a follow. Thank you so much for joining me. I have been Buddy Sola. You can find me at @BuddySola on Twitter. You can also come hang out with us in the Akupara Games Discord, discord.gg/Akupara Games. I'm in there all the time, as you can imagine, as a community manager. It is literally my job, but it is also a very cool job, and we also have a lot of fun. You can play Brainframe as well as play Maze Panic and Tavern Keeper. All 3 of our Akupara Game Jam 2020 prototypes are up live now on both itch.io and Gamejolt. Links will also be down in the doobly-doo for those. But without further ado, I think that brings us to an end. Until next time, loyal listeners.